Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Today we're going to talk with a legislative candidate because honestly we haven't spent a lot of time during the general election part of the election cycle talking to legislative candidates. Our guest is Todd Reisenauer. He's a Democrat. He's seeking a seat in the State House of Representatives in District 46. Notable among his opponents in that district is longtime State Representative Jim Kasper, who, by the way, is also somebody who may or may not be in the running for a leadership position. I guess we don't know. I tried at one point to ask him that question, and I got a little bit of a runaround about whether or not he was going to seek a leadership position. So I don't know. I guess ask Jim Kasper if he's going to do it. But Jim Kasper's been there a long time, and I guess there's a question. And Chad and I talked about this a little bit earlier in the cycle when we were going through, sort of legislative races to watch in North Dakota. District 46 is one of them that we said, and one of the reasons why is it's always been a purplish district. I mean, for a long time, you had moderate Republican. Jim Kasper is a very, very hard, right-wing hardliner Republican, but he's always had kind of a moderate next to him. Former State Representative Kathy Hawken, was a very moderate Republican, elected there for a long time. Shannon Norris-Jones, who's opting not to run for re-election. She's the incumbent in that race, but she's not running. She was there. This is sort of the first time where Kasper doesn't have somebody like that running alongside him. So it's an interesting dynamic. So we're going to talk with Todd about that. And I guess, Todd, first question for you as you're running for this seat. What are priorities? What are you thinking? What is your pitch to voters?
Well, first of all, thank you guys for Rob for having me on. Having this conversation, I think, is at this time, this month is awesome. So I appreciate you bringing me on. So just if I may tell just a little bit of my personal story, and I think it kind of piggybacks on what you're saying. So I wasn't going to run. I mean, I work a software job in my basement, had my home, office, and really wasn't even thinking about running for political office. And then January 22nd hits, and Shannon Roars announces she's not running. And so that got my attention, obviously. And then I kind of got some of the background of why she's not running, and really I think shift that happened in the Republican Party in District 46, where more of the extreme kind of culture warriors really took over the district. And I don't know if they're looking to force her out or take her to primary, what the situation was. To me, it sounded like, Shannon, you mentioned Kathy. These are people that really represent. Agree with them, 9 out of 10 issues, 7 out of 10. They really represent the heart of District 46. And so I just felt compelled that we can't have District 46 be the front lines of a culture war. And so I think that just ties into what you were saying. And that was kind of the biggest driver. And I think if you kind of look at the hierarchy of that, where that goes, we have what we consider pretty good quality of life in District 46. We have opportunities. We have a lot of builders. We have developers. Not everybody is doing awesome in 46, but generally, we're kind of that serene, very bipartisan, just get stuff done kind of district. And I really see that being threatened by what's coming with a lot of just wasting time, money, resources fighting issues that, we hear every day on national radio. And I don't want to be part of that. I don't want my daughter to grow up to be part of that, have leaders that really don't reflect our values. And that all starts with just stopping extremism on both sides. Sometimes it can go the other way as well. So that's where I'm at. But if I look at issues, it's really, we've got a set of issues that compound on top of each other. And it really starts to, in my belief, with, you can talk workforce, all of a sudden we just don't wake up and have a workforce issue. That's a lack of housing. That's quality of life, that we can't attract new people to the maybe younger people into the state. So those are the things that we need everybody on board thinking through. We can't have ideology. We can't have like these just political fights that get us nowhere. We've got real problems, and I think this is where government needs to work. It's time. So that's what drew me into the race.
Todd, one of the things that wasn't mentioned is the Senate seats in District 46 have sort of toggled between George Sinner and Jim Roars as well. So it really is a purplish district that I think Jim Kasper has benefited from these sort of more traditional Republicans in those seats. So, Jim Kasper is seen as sort of a culture warrior. Do you want to talk about how you would approach cultural issues differently than Jim Kasper? And it's my understanding that his two running mates are also sort of that same ilk, where there's lots of focus on issues related to what books are in schools, transgender, those sort of issues. Can you talk about how you'd handle those cultural issues versus maybe the kitchen table issues that are maybe a little more important to most North Dakotans?
Yeah, absolutely. So, let me start by saying, and I'm probably going to get some people on my side of the aisle a little bit upset. I'm not an activist. I'm not somebody out to, take an issue that is, affects maybe 10%, whatever, and kind of bring that to my main policy. That's not where I want to be and spend my time. I can care about stuff personally, but we've got to represent North Dakota and where North Dakotans are at. So let me just preface with that. But in relation to Kasper, and I think what he kind of represents and is at the forefront of is, bringing the national red meat issues into our schools, into our bedrooms, into our homes, and really it's frightening. We always try to get votes, try to get elected by selling fear or trying to scare people into voting us. But I really think this time, you have a situation where when we say democracy is at stake, I don't think we're too far off. I think I see a kind of a reality where, we're starting to really limit who can vote, how they can vote. So that's, democracy is on the ballot. I truly believe that. But I think more specifically, we're burning people out. So when Shannon announced that she wasn't running, number one issue is just, I'm tired of these, cultural bills, just having to fight it. It's a grind. We're not getting anywhere. And I don't know if that's by design or if that's like the end state that some politicians view. But at the end of the day, the result is it's just tiring. It's just kind of demotivating people. Teachers don't want these issues in their classroom. So my kind of Tim Walz's line, just mind your own business. It's if you're adults, you have responsibility, make adult decisions for your family, doctor, whoever you consult with. So let's just leave it there. It doesn't need to be debated every 2 years in Bismarck with everybody at each other's throats. So that's where I am. Secondly, to your question, so what am I for? So I'm a Democrat because I believe Democrats do have a purpose, and sometimes we try to think during times of when things are really good, like kind of twiddling our thumbs. What can we social engineer? I think that's where we run into problems. But I'm a Democrat because I believe there's a significant part of our population that is in crisis, and so that can be a mental health crisis. That can be, hey, I want to pull myself up of poverty. I don't have those connections. I don't have that bridge. And so that's really where I think we can make the biggest impact is just taking the edge off somebody having a really bad day, affecting a whole bunch of other things, impacting mass shooting, just, some type of, I think we really need to focus on the people in crisis and how we can help them. I think that's where I want to focus my time. And that comes to giving people the right foundation to be able to pull themselves up when trouble hits. And that's public education, having that background, having that foundation, access to mental health care. We talked about this for years and years, but we just can't seem to move on it. I'm a true believer that if you're having a bad day, addiction, just whatever life brings at you, you've got to have that outlet that's healthy, that can kind of pull you through. And then also, we've seen so much with workforce, and everybody talks about workforce, but again, we want to talk about, hey, we need to build some housing, affordable first-time housing that can bring people in, housing that's, geared for maybe the people that have made it a little bit and they want to buy their second, third home. All of these issues kind of come together, and it starts with shifting government from being just really reactive to actually doing strategic planning on a set of large priorities that we can all build a consensus around. And I know I'm kind of sounding kumbaya here, but I really think that's where we need to focus our time on the large issues, macro issues that affect everyone. And we can control those and come up with solutions if we work smartly with them.
People might be wondering why I'm not flipping out because Todd used the E word, extremist. In a previous podcast, I kind of objected to that. And I do have reservation about it because I really want to get past this era where we're demonizing, and this does play into my question for you, Todd, where we're sort of demonizing the other side. Although I'm making my peace with it because in some instances I don't know how, when the rest of us are over here and it's like, well, we've got a childcare shortage. What are we going to do about it? Maybe there's conservative ideas, maybe there's liberal ideas for it. And then there's people over here that don't want to talk about stuff like that at all. And they're obsessed with, and maybe extreme's the right word for them. I don't know. I do really want to be careful with how we talk about each other sometimes. But, and I guess that's my question for you, Todd. I, as you might expect, talk to a lot of Republicans in North Dakota, and a lot of them at times, it almost feels like they're hostages because they see what's happening to their party, particularly in the Trump era. They don't like it, but they're not ready to vote for a Democrat yet because they're really afraid that if I vote for a Democrat, this Democrat is going to promote a style of government that is bad for my business or bad, is going to promote policies that I don't like. It's really hard to get them over that hump. So I guess that's my question for you, Todd, is to win in a place like District 46, you're going to have to win over some Republicans. So how do you convince them that voting for a Democrat's not such a bad thing?
It's tough. I mean, Chad mentioned I think the only candidate that has won in this district is George Center. And so even though we are kind of that purple district, it's difficult. You put a D behind your name, you are, there's a good chance you're going to lose. So I think where I'm different is I don't know if you call it a bridge or kind of a hybrid, but I don't believe in one size fits all government. So I'm going to come in with an approach that, there are times, and I'm going to sound sacrilegious. There's times when I think lower taxes are appropriate. We need to have that conversation. We need to talk about, what regulations can stop people from building homes. If the number one need in North Dakota is we need homes, as far as, what people are asking for, let's take a serious look at those regulations and what we can eliminate to spur building. So, I didn't tell you about my background. I come from Western North Dakota. I grew up on a farm. You grew up on a farm, you can't be a Republican or a Democrat when you're working on equipment, you're in the field, you're pragmatic. And I think that is just ingrained in me. I'm not afraid to say conservatives have good policy ideas, and sometimes Democrats just overshoot and try to overthink policy and just go by the conversation, and then they kind of become many times irrelevant to the conversation. And so I think that comes from something that's also ingrained in me, is listening to people. And when you hear cues and you hear kind of the read body language when you're talking about a big program and they're like, it's not what I need. I need you to solve this for me and I can do the rest. And so I think having that approach, it may sound like it's not, a big part of a political movement, but it's really one-on-one relationship building politics. So that's my plan, to really have those conversations that may go in many, many different directions. But at the end of the day, I'm not beholden to what national Democrats may have. I look to what is needed locally, and that's again just ingrained in me out of my pragmatism.
Todd, you brought up taxes and the potential of maybe lowering some taxes. Jim Kasper is one of the legislative supporters of Measure 4, which would abolish the ability of local political subs to assess property taxes, unassessed value. I personally have the opinion that likely is going to go down, but that doesn't mean that property taxes are all of a sudden great. So you go to Bismarck, people are frustrated with property taxes. What are you going to do? I assume people in 46 are frustrated with property taxes as well. What are you going to do about property taxes, assuming Measure 4 goes down, to maybe alleviate some of the pressure on those taxpayers?
It's got to be, well, first of all, I'll give the political answer. It's got to be a bipartisan approach. I think we don't have the answer today. One thing I remember Rob's column probably months ago about people, saying I'm not a politician, or I don't want to be a politician. I think you're right. I think we need politicians. We need to have people come in and talk about policy, debate policy, think through and rationalize. Hey, what are the implications? What are the potential ways that this could impact things down the road? This is literally a conversation we need to have around property taxes, because we don't have the right formula today. Just completely tying it to assess property value, just the spikes, the bubbles that we've had over the last 20 years. It's absolutely just a weight on people. So we do have to come up with a solution. And it can be a mix, I think, of some targeted credits, targeted maybe up to a certain point of the property is exempt. Everything's on the table other than eliminating property taxes, because I think the hole and the unknowns that would open up, not, as you guys say, taking away local control to fix a pothole. That makes absolutely no sense. And I think it's too draconian, but you got to work. Kelly Armstrong, I remember one of the first things he pitched back in May, June, they really started launching his campaign was, let's fix property taxes. So I'm right there. It's something you just got to roll up your sleeves and think creatively. And I know that scares people when government's thinking creatively, but I think this really is an issue that we can find an equitable and a very a solution that isn't prone to just these spikes and hockey sticks looking things on people's property tax bills.
I want to drill down and I guess drill down, but also sort of get, take your temperature philosophically on this issue. One thing that we have certainly tried is buying down property taxes. We've done it all sorts of ways by accumulating more burden for schools into the state budget, taking over social services. We've done tax credits. In fact, most North Dakotans are enjoying most North Dakota property owners, I should say, are enjoying a $500 credit that the legislature passed. Those are nice, but to me, they also haven't worked.
Bad days.
They haven't addressed. So it seems to me that there's got to be structural reform. And I understand you just got done saying maybe you're not ready to have the answer right now or structural reform, but philosophically, do you have an appetite for more of those sorts of, because it really worries me too. The more we're shifting to the state budget, if the point is protecting local control, the more school funding you shift to the state level, the more local control you lose. The more local spending you shift to the state budget, the more local control you lose. So do we want to keep going down that road? What's your philosophy when you start contemplating these reforms?
So again, I'm going to dig in a little bit in my background. I'm a child of Dickinson, North Dakota in the 70s, grew up. So I'm a child of the first oil boom and all the mistakes that were made. And, sometimes when you're in that very reactive space, you do what you got to do, and so you're just looking for grasping what is the immediate way to end some pain. And, So I think just reflecting on that, when we do something, it can go two ways. It can help and everybody's happy. But we also have the chance of doing something that just takes us down a wrong path, and it takes decades to correct. And I think that's why it's so vital to have people in Bismarck that are serious about policy and bringing in the right stakeholders that have that experience, and not just wearing the ideological hat of no government spending, our government is the all end all. Got to find somewhere in the middle that we can meet. But to your question, Rob, I am absolutely for structural reform. What my business career really is around system thinking, and that means reforming the base, reforming the foundation. We have data. I mean, we can use big data to guide us in some of these, and we can look at other states that have been successful. There are methods. There's tooling. There's ways that we're in a better space now to solve this problem, I believe, just with the knowledge that we've acquired, to think what is the best solution. And so I don't know what that is today, as you pointed out, but I do know that we've got capacity, we've got tools, we've got smart people, much smarter than I, that we can come up with a solution that works, that is long-term structural reform. So we're not arguing about this every 5 to 10 years and having people, just totally burdened and shocked when they open their mailbox and see this new tax assessment. So I don't know if that answers your question 100%, maybe not enough detail and plan, but absolutely, I'm for structural reform on property taxes.
Todd, one of the favorite issues that Rob and I talk about is the issue about universal school meals. And the reason why I say it's a favorite topic of mine is because Rob and I get to the same point on supporting universal meals or universal lunch, but maybe come at it from a little different perspective, right? We both want to feed kids ultimately, but I think Rob also points out that this is a great way to get dollars in the pockets of working families, and not just kids in public schools, but also private schools as well. Where are you at on universal school meals? Do you have any concerns about that? Just what's your perspective on universal school meals?
So I absolutely support the concept implementing universal school meals. And the reason I think we get better results, they have better output. And it sounds like a sci-fi movie, I know. We're talking about just kids being an output. But I believe I was a farm kid again. So, I probably spent 75% of my day just thinking about food, being hungry, because you're doing stuff in the morning. You just don't get, you don't feel like eating. So having that breakfast provided at school, as a farm kid, I was had free reduced lunches kind of thing in the 80s. Everybody knows that story. We didn't have that that started in the 90s, but I would have absolutely loved that, because I would have got something in my stomach. I would have been in a much better place to learn, not be so, I guess, just, kind of squirry in class. And then, lunch, having a good quality lunch, and then letting that kind of take care of your afternoon. So I think we just get better outcomes. We get better results. Kids are learning when they're fully fed. And I also think, yes, that the opposite of that is if we can share that expense, people get more money back in their pockets. So we see almost an immediate, and not to sound like a business guy, but we do see almost an immediate ROI on providing school lunches, because that's now taken, no pun intended, off the parents' plate, and it saves money for everybody. So it makes sense to me.
I think Chad and I like talking about the school lunch issue so much because it's sort of a perfect microcosm for the way in which politics has just become an exercise in opposing what the other side's for. And it's when you're opposing the school lunch, like, what really are the arguments? Like, it costs too much. Well, not really. We could do this affordably. And the school lunch program's not making money anyway. It's really not, but the dollars add up. And who cares how you look at it? I look at it from a conservative perspective. It's almost like tax relief targeted for families, and I say that, I still have 2 kids. I'm still paying 2 school lunch tabs right now. And I tell you, I pay more for school lunch every year than I do in income taxes. So, why not do it that way? And then, the progressive argument for it is also valid, but maybe not, the top of the mind for conservatives. But I guess maybe speak to that a little bit. Like, again, so much of politics right now just seems to be like, well, if Democrats are for it, then I have to be against it because I'm a Republican, and vice versa. I would really like to see people get back to the idea where a good idea is just a good idea, and I don't really care who has it.
You nailed it. When I was in my 20s, that's really where I became politically aware. It was Bush and everything Bush promoted, what he was, outside of the Iraq, we'll leave that one, but just talking about his social agenda and all that. Like he was the devil to so many on the left. And then over time, now he's like kind of revered. I think that's Cheney.
Last night, Tim Walsh said that the Kamala Harris coalition goes from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney. This is the world we're living in right now.
And Taylor Swift. And Taylor Swift.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, there was nobody more demonized than Dick Cheney on the left. I mean, they wanted him literally in jail, pull him up out of his wheelchair on Inauguration Day in 2009 and put him in jail. I mean, that was what people were calling for. And I at that time, I kind of shifted as like, this is not our political discourse. It cannot be. We're heading down the old proverbial race to the bottom. And even, when Trumpism came, I grew up, I'm talking about my past too much. I grew up watching Trump on Letterman in the 80s, and I liked him. I was like,
sure,
first concepts of, it was funny. And he talked about American workers and how they were really getting screwed by, our trade policy. And I didn't really understand what all of that meant, but I just liked that message. And my first political battle, actually, when I was a sophomore, was the precipice of NAFTA. And I was like Ross Perot, I was like, I feel like this is opening the door to destroying our middle class, our manufacturing sector, even though sophomore, I don't understand all that, but I was very closely aligned to some protectionism, that these big global trade agreements ultimately would hollow out our middle class. And so that's still there. I mean, I still kind of, when I hear that, it's like, well, that's, but we can't go back. We can't put that back in the genie, back in the bottle, of course. But I think to your point is, yes, we've got to find a way to turn off the tribalism, the red, the blue, it happens on both sides, and just be able to stomach the idea, if that's where you need to start, that sometimes Republicans have really good ideas and sometimes Democrats aren't going to screw everything up. So,
I feel your comments so much about being a 20-year-old and having that. And the problem was I started my political writing career as a 22-year-old 22 years ago. And I mean, that was the thing is all of a sudden I had this audience that grew to be obviously a very big audience. And I didn't have an editor. I didn't know what I was doing. It was just 20-year-old Rob, viscerally reacting to the news of the day. I mean, my writing career literally started with me having big feelings after 9/11, and just looking for a way to express them. And then realizing a couple years into it, people were reading this stuff. And I'd better start using spell check and thinking about some of the things I'm writing. And also, let's be honest. If you haven't changed in your politics from your 20s to your 40s, there's something wrong with you. You live, you learn, you change. That's life. That's the trajectory. So that's all.
Rob, I didn't want to interrupt you, but some would say that not a lot has changed in the 20 years. You still don't know what you're doing. You still could use an editor, but I don't want to give those folks. You have an editor now?
I have several. I have several now.
Right. But I read your Facebook comments. There's some people who don't think you know what you're doing, Rob.
Well, they're just different people now.
You know what's cool about that is it's a concept that is, again, talking about my background, it's DIY. And so I came to Fargo from Dickinson when I was 18 years old to go to school and played punk rock music. And so coming off that farm, being pragmatic and being DIY means I'm always skeptical that some guy may know what he sounds like he's talking about, but I'm going to question him and I'm going to be skeptical towards that. And so I've always got this in the back of my mind, like, this guy might be full of it. Maybe he knows it. So, but I love that concept of just, having a mission, being passionate about something and doing it yourself. And I can totally relate to that because I still have that kind of that ethos today.
So Todd, you're saying you're still punk rock after all these years?
So I've got not so much more, but I'll flip my camera around here. You can see my guitars.
Nice. Favorite punk rock band?
So I'm a 70s. Yeah. So
why is that the Ramones?
So I'm in the 70s. I love the Ramones. I also love Cleveland punk bands that came out in the 70s. So I'm a big Dead Boys fan. But certainly Ramones are awesome. California stuff, obviously Misfits, influenced me very, just the kind of the 50s, really, shouldn't be like this dark, demonic looking band, just basically playing Buddy Holly 50s riffs is pretty cool to me. So I play 3-chord rock. I'm not great. But it's just something that, I don't know, it soothes my mind.
Yeah. Well, we've covered everything from your property tax philosophy to your musical influences. So it may be time to end this interview. Todd, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you guys.
Yes, Todd.
Great to be here.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
We'll just finish up. That's Todd Reisenauer, candidate, District 46. That's one of the races. I know election night, that'll be one of the ones on my radar that I'm watching because it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Because in a lot of ways, Jim Kasper, especially with Rick Becker not being in the House of Representatives anymore, there's kind of a power vacuum for that part of the Republican Party. And it's interesting to know who's going to fill it. Kasper's one who could, if he survives this election, which he may not. I mean, it's tough. Now that he doesn't kind of have a Republican, moderate Republican cover, he's really the face of the ticket now. And he may struggle. We're going to see.
Yeah, traditional Republicans had a great primary night, right? A lot of the sort of far-right Bastiat folks lost. If they want to really make this next legislative session a successful one for traditional Republican values, they're going to want to make sure that Jim Kasper and Jared Hendricks don't get elected because all it's going to be, they need to tone down the rhetoric a little bit. It gets better without Becker. It gets better without Brandon Pritchard. It gets better without Luke Simons. It would also, some of these cultural issues would calm down a little bit more if Jim Kasper is not there. So I think moderate traditional Republicans need to be thinking about what do they want this session to look like, and having a 12th or 13th Democrat is probably going to make traditional Republicans' jobs a hell of a lot easier.
Well, I can tell you traditional Republicans are thinking about that, and I think we're going to have some evidence of that in the coming days. But let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about that vice presidential debate last night. It's been a weird cycle because normally debates, like the conventional wisdom is debates don't matter. And then we had two presidential debates that mattered a huge amount. We saw one where it became undeniable that Joe Biden didn't have it anymore for another 4 years in office. And then we had another debate at which, Donald Trump lost his mind on stage and now is refusing to do any more debates.
It showed he's been ready for another 4 years in office.
Fair, absolutely. But the vice presidential debate, I don't know that this really moved the needle one way or the other. I don't think Walz did a very good job. And I think Walz lived up to the expectations that he set for himself. I mean, he sort of famously told Kamala Harris, or at least reportedly, that he's not a good debater. We saw that. He's not. This is not his strong suit. I don't think he hurt the ticket. But it was one of the most interesting, and I wrote about this today. The interesting thing to me is two things. I think the juxtaposition of J.D. Vance staring down the barrel of the camera with his gorgeous eyelashes and just telling bald-faced lies that we want to move on from the 2020 election. It was a peaceful transition of power. No, it wasn't.
Trump saved Obamacare.
Right. Juxtaposed with Tim Walz owning some things he said in the past that weren't correct. In fact, not in the not-so-recent past. I mean, he claimed to have been in China during the Tiananmen Square protests. He was not. Previously, he has exaggerated his military record. These are unfortunate things, and he should be accountable for them. But he's also owned up to them, right? We're not 4 years in like Donald Trump, still denying the election. So there was that juxtaposition. It was almost like Tim Walz was kind of a reminder for me last night of what it looks like to have a politician who is still capable of feeling a little bit of shame or remorse about something, which I thought was really interesting. And then the other thing was, it's like everybody's talking about how civil it was. And it was, right? I mean, there were moments they kind of thanked each other at times. That was refreshing. But we're also kind of ignoring what Donald Trump was doing on social media while the debate was going on. I mean, he's calling Walz dumb and just posting all sorts of crazy stuff, which has been a theme of this entire election, where Donald Trump is so crazy, we've all become inured to it, to where when he behaves crazy, it's normal. But if anybody else did that, they'd be absolutely skewered. Anyway, those are my two big takeaways from a debate that ultimately is not going to change the outcome of this election at all.
So I agree, by and large, with what you said. I don't think it affects anything. I think the numbers I've seen, both Vance and J.D. Walz approval ratings went up after last night. I think that it was amazing to see in a debate where, by and large, they were talking about policy and it wasn't really aggressive towards one another. I was shocked. I didn't know that J.D. Vance existed. Mr. Bipartisan worked together and solved problems. That's not the history that he's had in the past. I do think Walz missed some pitches. To your point about lying, it would have been very easy for him to own the China thing and say, I misspoke. But how about the guy next to me who was lying every 5 minutes into the camera, or the guy he's running with who lies? I think there were some pitches missed. I also think what Tim Walz is best at is sort of just not speaking off the cuff, but sort of being relaxed and whatever. I think sometimes when people prepare for debates, they over-prepared. I thought he seemed a little over-prepared at the beginning. Like there were certain words that he was supposed to use and he was using them a lot.
I also feel like he had so many words ready to go. It's like they weren't all getting out. Like there was a log jam and he was trying to get to them all and he was rushed and it came off. And he wouldn't finish a thought. He would go and then
jump to the next one.
You jump to the next one and it's like you didn't complete that one. So he clearly, that's not his element.
Yep. And I think the Democrat sort of talking heads I've seen is, did no harm. Overall did no harm. And again, when you think about those first two debates that you described, last night was downright boring compared to those two things, which is okay to have a boring debate.
Which, by the way, is the thing that we want. I've been wanting to get a T-shirt that says "Make politics boring again," and I see that as somebody who makes a living from political intrigue. So,
but again, I think that the biggest takeaway is the answer at the end, where J.D. Vance couldn't answer the question who won the 2020 election. Come on, man, you can't say we're looking forward while at the same time not being able to say who won the last election.
Out of all, you're right that Walz missed some pitches. And out of all the pitches he missed, and probably because, January 6th has kind of been central to where I'm at politically right now in this moment, where I cannot support Republicans who don't acknowledge what that was. So that, when J.D. Vance said, there was Donald Trump supported the peaceful transition of power, I wanted Walz to say he's calling the people who were arrested for January 6th unbelievable patriots. He's promised to pardon them. He's played audio of them singing the national anthem at his rallies. He's treated these people like heroes. So for you to, for J.D. Vance to sit there and condemn the violence and to say there was, Donald Trump supported the peaceful transition of power. No, he didn't. And to this day, he does not.
So, Rob, do you think Walz needed to point that out?
Yes.
Or do you think that people get that, right? And the other thing is, who are swing voters? and our undecided voters and our undecided voters watching this. Like, that's the other thing that's sort of interesting is I don't know, after 9 years of Donald Trump being on the national stage, who these undecided people are and what's going to move them at this point.
I don't know. I mean, it's a fair point. I think you. To me, it was an opening, and when they give you an opening, you throw it back at him. I mean, what he was saying was false, demonstrably false, and that's what you're up there for, is to throw it back. Does it change? Would it have turned that debate into something more meaningful? Probably not. You know, yeah. I mean, at this point, I mean, again, but that's the scale we're grading on. Where Donald Trump, there's a significant portion of they've just signed off on him being crazy. They're just willing to accept it. They're fine with it. It doesn't matter what he says. And then the rest of us fall into the trap of just there's one standard for Donald Trump's behavior and another standard for everybody else's. It's ridiculous and it's unfair, but yet that's where we are.
Yep. Well, I was also interested to hear that J.D. Vance supports some sort of paid family leave, supports more federal investment in childcare as long as it comes with flexibility.
Doesn't support a national abortion ban, even though he has a lengthy record of doing just that.
Yeah, it was like literally a different person up there. I mean, and he is so smooth, and he is so like, I mean, I was watching him like, man, this guy makes me cringe, but I don't know if he's making other people cringe.
Well, the thing is that an observer like you or an observer like me, or even a lot of the people talking on television about him, we know J.D. Vance, right? Because we watch him all the time. We see what he posts on social media. We see what he says on platforms and in venues that don't get as much attention as a primetime debate stage. And we understand that he shifted, like he's a chameleon, right? Like he became a completely different person on that stage. The problem is how many because who are the swing voters, you ask? Well, I would contend that they're probably people who haven't been paying attention. And so they may be paying attention now, and to the extent that they are, they saw J.D. Vance, who made the Trump-Vance ticket look a lot more palatable, maybe than Trump makes it look.
But how many people? So I also question: does anybody vote based on who the vice president is? I mean, were people voting for Mike Pence? Were people voting for Kamala Harris? Right? I mean, so that's the other thing that. Like there's and maybe it's different because this is the last one. I mean, because Donald Trump is clearly scared to get on stage with Kamala again.
He's scared to do 60 Minutes too. Like despite I think every president for the last 40 or 50 years has done. Kamala Harris is doing a 60-minute interview, but Donald Trump is not.
Well, I understand why he's nervous when you're that old and you're slipping. That maybe you don't want to do a lot of press or do debates anymore. He saw the Biden debate performance and said, I don't want to be that guy.
Well, I think the last minute he did a 60-minute interview, he didn't like the questions and he got up and he left partway through it. And I think he doesn't, Donald Trump thinks that any question that could be perceived as critical for Donald Trump is a problem. And his supporters do too. I mean, you want to talk about the victim mentality. There it is. Donald Trump is perpetually a victim. But and the one thing you say, I don't think that people are going to vote for J.D. Vance, but I do think that J.D. Vance can shift the lens through which people see Donald Trump by making the ticket seem more reasonable as a surrogate. So I think that's
that having an old white guy in the ticket helps Kamala maybe be a little bit more powerful.
Well, even though he's younger than Kamala, but yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Perceived because he's got the gray hair and he's bald and he looks like a grandpa.
As a bald guy with a white beard, I cannot relate to that at all. Speaking of that, it's my son's 8th birthday today. Happy birthday to Evan. And periodically when I pick him up at school, people say, Evan, your grandpa's here. So I can really relate to Tim Walz looking a little bit older than his age.
Well, happy birthday to Evan. Speaking about the January 6th stuff, that's another thing that we should talk about because we had some news related to January 6th in North Dakota. Damian Johnston, who is a son of Daniel Johnston, who is a former state lawmaker, former candidate for treasurer, current candidate for the legislature again in District 2024, right?
Yep.
Yeah, District 24. I get that. Unless I look at the numbers, I get them mixed up all the time. District 24. He was arrested. Apparently, he was currently living in Wisconsin. He was arrested in Wisconsin. He's charged with 4 federal crimes for entering the Capitol. Now, in the federal complaint that was filed, there was nothing in there about him specifically committing acts of violence and everything else. But he went in the Capitol when a violent mob attacked it. That maybe all the glass was already broken by the time he got there, I don't know, is exactly an exoneration of him. But I mean, this is a scary thing. I think it's inexcusable that he went in there. Now, when I asked for a comment about this from Senator Kevin Cramer and Congressman Kelly Armstrong, because they have ties to the Johnston family, Dan Johnston gave one of Senator Kevin Cramer's nominating speeches at the NDGOP convention earlier this year. Damian Johnston's mother, Dan's wife, gave a nominating speech for Kelly Armstrong. And this is what Armstrong said about Damian Johnston getting arrested. He said, I quote, "He was an 18-year-old kid who did something stupid. It appears that as soon as he was asked by law enforcement to leave, he did. I am relieved for his family, whom I still consider good friends, that he is only charged with misdemeanors." That seems to be, Armstrong's doing some minimizing there, but at least seems willing to acknowledge that he did something wrong. This is Senator Cramer's statement. It's long past time to move on from the events of January 6th, especially over minor offenses like those Mr. Johnston is accused of. The FBI should focus on assassination attempts of President Trump and convicted murderers and rapists walking into the United States across Kamala Harris's open southern border. This is a waste of law enforcement resources and a further indication of a severely weaponized DOJ.
Oh. I am sure that Kelly Armstrong and Kevin Cramer would feel the same way if it was an 18-year-old kid from Standing Rock breaking into the state capitol. I'm sure they would feel the same way. 18-year-old kids make terrible decisions every day. They're adults. They need to be held accountable. And that's generally how conservatives have handled these things in the past. I think that poo-pooing it and somehow bringing in Kamala Harris and the southern border, the way Kevin Cramer just completely politicized this thing, does a disservice to what happened on January 6th. They were there. They know how bad it was. He's going to get a slap on the wrist, but come on, guys. We don't need to just justify it saying it's not that bad or if it's in the past. I mean, the guy was part of a mob. Even if he didn't break the glass, he was there and he knew better.
I don't think you can say that it's in the past when the potential next president of the United States is honoring the people who were arrested and convicted of crimes on January 6th as martyrs and heroes and patriots, and still maintains that the election was stolen from him, which was the lie that motivated this mob in the first place. It's not in the past. This is the first national election we've had since January 6th. This is our first opportunity for voters to hold Donald Trump responsible for it in an electoral setting, and I hope they will. But I share your frustration with the minimization of this. He was part of a mob that was part of a terrible, historically terrible event in American politics. So, and to be fair, I mean, you look at the charges, the 4 charges against him are basically they're misdemeanors. They amount to trespassing. And that's probably appropriate based on the evidence that they presented in the complaint. But the thing is, he'll have his day in court and he's innocent until proven guilty. But based on what they've said, it's a credible accusation. And if he did it, he should be held accountable for it.
Yeah, and I get tired of somehow January 6th is a place where it's okay to hit police officers. But these same folks will be at every Back the Blue rally in the whole state. They'll always be, always back the blue, unless we're trying to, overturn a national election and beating the hell out of Capitol Hill police. The hypocrisy just reeks. And also the other thing is, I don't care if Johnson's family are friends of yours or not. It's wrong. And I think everybody needs to be held to the same account. I also think that we need to be really careful, and this is another place in District 24. If Republicans want to restore some normalcy to the legislature, vote for a Democrat. Vote for a Democrat. Democrat number 14 or 15 isn't going to matter. the legislature will be better without former Representative Johnston back in there.
I think that's, one of the questions I asked our guest, Todd Reisenauer, was how do you convince Republicans to sort of get over the I would say valid concern. Like if you're a conservative, you might have concerns about voting for a liberal. That's not invalid.
Right.
How to get over that hump? Well, part of it is if you're concerned about what's happening to your party, really the only cure for that in our election system is that party's candidates losing, right? Or at least the ones who are part of the problem losing. That's the only way to solve this. That is the only way, because otherwise if you reward it, and the thing is we conservatives, we free market capitalists, or used to be, we should understand this. You get more of what you reward. So if you continue to reward the people who behave this way, you're going to get more of it. So if you're concerned about your party going off the rails, pump the brakes. Vote for somebody else.
And the reality is having 13, 14, 15 Democrats out of 94 in the North Dakota House isn't going to dramatically shift any policy. It's not going to change any policy, but it might affect the issues that are being worked on and the seriousness of the legislators that are there. And here's the deal. A Democrat in a district like 24 likely will only be in for 4 years, because 4 years from now, Republicans will probably nominate somebody better, and it's a tough district for Democrats. So I just think if you want to pull your party back, folks did a good job in the primary, but there's still more work to be done if you really want to make the legislature a place that works on issues like property taxes and funding education and all the other things that affect people's everyday life.
So there's, I should point out, there's been a legal defense fund started for Damian Johnston, and I bring this up not because I want to assist it. I hope he gets all the legal representation he wants. I'm made a little sick to my stomach, the idea that we're treating it like he's some sort of a martyr or a victim, because he is not. But it was shared by former state representative Rick Becker. I don't know if he's the one who started it or not. It says the campaign was created by friends of Damian Johnston. So I don't know who that is. And I guess I just as I talk, it's got $2,800 that's been donated. Although the bulk, it doesn't seem to be getting a lot. I mean, the last donation was 16 hours ago. The bulk of it's come in a few. There's $1,000 donation, a $500, via $300 to $250. There's been a few of those. It's not getting a lot of traction, but I just, again, this idea that the people who perpetrated January 6th and Damian Johnston, even though, maybe he didn't specifically break anything or destroy anything or didn't commit any acts of violence against a specific person that we know of, he was part of it. And this idea that he's the victim in this is ridiculous. And that's what, when Senator Kramer, talked about, the weaponization of the DOJ, that makes it sound like the DOJ are the bad guys for attempting to prosecute somebody who is accused of committing a federal crime. That is their job. And, the proper response is Damian Johnston's innocent until proven guilty. He's going to have his day in court. But if he did these crimes, he should be ashamed and he should be held accountable. That's right. The appropriate response.
And also him connecting it to the assassination attempts of Trump, as if because they're prosecuting Daniel or Johnston. I can't remember which one is which, so I apologize.
Daniel is the father. Damian is the son.
So because they're prosecuting Damian, they're not looking into the assassination attempts of Trump or aren't securing the southern border. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. It's not a statement that is worthy of a U.S. senator. And I think Kevin Kramer generally, does a pretty good job with the press. But for some reason, the stuff related to Trump and January 6th, he's got a blind spot. I don't get it. I just don't get it. One thing too is you can juxtapose this with the work that Senator Kramer's been deeply involved in the state of North Dakota, making its case in the context of the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, making the case that the federal government should have acted against people who were trespassing, right? I mean, the argument from the state of North Dakota, and I think it's the correct argument,
is that the people who are camping illegally and using those protest camps as bases from which to launch what were at times very violent protests, they should have been held accountable for trespassing. And the Obama administration didn't. And that was wrong. But the thing is, if that's how you feel, and you feel the rule of law should have ruled the day that day, then the rule of law should have ruled the day on January 6th as well.
Well, I also just because it was on January 6th, he shouldn't be prosecuted. I'm guessing if somebody just went to the U.S. Capitol today and broke in and went to somewhere they weren't supposed to, that doesn't mean that we should let them off the hook, right? I mean, again, he was trespassing. He was part of a violent mob. You don't just ignore it because it was everybody was doing it.
Right, and it's different. I would say I went on a class trip to Washington, D.C. one time, and it was my English teacher, who must have had a flash of foresight, actually nominated me to go to this student journalism conference. And so we went there, and we had students from across the nation. I was the only student from the state of North Dakota. And so when they cut us all loose on Capitol Hill to go visit our members of Congress, it was just me, and I was trying to find Ken Conrad and Byron Dorgan's office. And they weren't there, but they gave me a ticket to get into Congress to see, and I'm forgetting what it was called, but they gave me a ticket where I could get into a special area of Congress. And I went over to the Capitol building. And obviously this is pre-9/11. I mean, these are the good old days, right? So I went through the rinky-dink metal detector, and I got lost in this building, and I'm pretty sure I went to some places I was not supposed to go. Now, Did I commit a federal crime? I should not have been prosecuted for being a kid who was lost on Capitol Hill. Daniel Johnston was not a kid who was lost on Capitol Hill. Daniel Johnston followed a violent mob into the Capitol that broke windows, that assaulted people. 140 police officers were wounded on January 6th. 12 of them were put in the hospital. So, this wasn't some innocent babe in the woods who just wandered into a place where he wasn't supposed to be.
Yeah, and before we started recording, you brought up the gentleman who brought the axe to Senator Hoeven's office in Fargo a few years ago, and frankly, again, I think most people thought that guy should be prosecuted for what he did. Yeah. I mean, there was a legal defense fund that was set up for him as well.
Some Democrats made some donations, and I kind of roasted him for it. And some of the language around that legal defense fund that made it sound like he was being persecuted or he was being singled out was really unfortunate and is not all that different from what Senator Kramer's doing here.
So do you think Kelly Armstrong and Kevin Kramer thought that guy shouldn't have been prosecuted?
No,
or,
prosecuted. Of course they
or there's something in the past.
Of course they thought I mean, it's not hard to think that they also thought that the Dakota Access Pipeline protester who went up to the state capitol and threw oil all over the front doors of the Capitol, that person probably should have faced a misdemeanor charge or something for vandalism and trespass. I mean,
yeah, here's the deal. Maybe if they were on the opposite side of the aisle, they would just be peaceful protesters. That's how they'd be defined by Donald Trump.
But that's the thing. The left did that a lot with the Dakota Access Pipeline protests and with the Black Lives Matter protests and a lot of those others where it was like, well, the ends justify the means. Well, now we're getting a taste of it on the other side. The ends don't justify the means. Either we believe in the rule of law or we don't. If you break the law, you should be held accountable. And it doesn't matter what your politics are. It doesn't matter what the political context says. It doesn't matter if it's politically inconvenient for you to say that in the moment. Either the rule of law matters or it doesn't.
Yeah. Rob, that's what I got for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, I saw the Johnson thing. I thought it was not surprising, knowing.
But by the way, one of the people that they traveled to Washington D.C. with, Rockne Earls, has pleaded guilty to assaulting a police officer. He's been charged, he's guilty. He was there. In fact, if you look at my column about Damian Johnston in the video, Rockne Earls takes a video. Who's standing right next to him? Daniel Johnston. Damian Johnston. Now, again, Damian and Daniel are not responsible for what Rockne Earls did. But the thing is there's a point at which you're in that mob. You were there. So
yeah, and the video also appears like Daniel sort of putting his head down. Yeah. Like almost like he didn't want to be on video. if you wouldn't be afraid to be on video if you weren't nervous that something not good was taking place.
There's no evidence. There's no evidence that Daniel Johnson entered the Capitol or did anything illegal. He didn't. There's no evidence that he did anything illegal. Obviously, Damian Johnson stands accused, and in the federal government's complaint, there's multiple pictures that they say is him in the Capitol. Damian's going to have his day in court. But I think, setting aside criminal culpability, it was wrong that they were in that crowd. That crowd was motivated by the wrong things. It was a bad thing. And if you participated in it, that was a bad decision. Maybe not always criminal, right? If you didn't break into the Capitol, but it was wrong. And I am tired of pretending like it's not wrong. And and again, I all the time, Chad, I get people accusing me, Port got COVID and he changed and he's a liberal now. And I got to tell you, what changed me was January 6th. And I'm not a liberal now, but I am not willing to stand with Republicans who are going to pretend like that was something other than what it was.
Well, yeah, and the sort of rose-colored glasses when it comes to January 6th. I mean, all those people on January 6th were like, this is enough. Lindsey Graham, this is enough. We can't. And now
Kevin McCarthy.
Yeah,
I don't know. Even Kevin Kramer. I remember interviewing Kevin Kramer shortly after it, and I asked him, I was like, do you think that Donald Trump can still be a leader of Republicans? And he said, I don't think so. That's what he said. Obviously feels very differently now.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, we're going to end it there. Please don't donate to Damian Johnson's legal defense fund. I hope he is entitled as an American to legal defense, but you don't have to help him. That's it. That's all I have for today. Thank you.
Send your $5 to Donald Trump instead, right?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, don't do that. Or do whatever you want. You're an American, but for crying out loud, think about who you're supporting. Somebody asked me if we had any more debates coming up. We do have one more, the superintendent debate. That's going to be on the 11th. If the 11th is a Friday.
Yep. Yes. Week from Friday.
Yes, that's right. So it's going to be on the 11th. So that's coming up not this Friday, next Friday. And then once that's done, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a column and just line up all the debates in one place that we did with all the different candidates and on all the measures, all the episodes that we did. So that's been a lot of fun doing that. Thank you so much to everybody who's been listening. And that's pretty much it. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Send me an email at rport@forumcom.com. That's forumcom with 2 M's.com. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
You still don't know what you're doing. You still could use an editor.